My name is Ruth, and at 66 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at me. Standing in my beloved beach house that morning, watching the sunrise paint the Atlantic Ocean in shades of gold, I never imagined that the two people I trusted most in this world were plotting to steal everything from me. What happened next would change our family forever, and by the time their screams echoed through these walls, justice had already been served. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this one, because what you are about to hear will make you question for everything you think you know about family loyalty. Let me take you back to how this all began, because understanding my past will help you grasp just how devastating this betrayal truly was. I had been married to my dear husband George for 38 beautiful years before cancer took him from me 4 years ago. We built our life together from nothing, working double shifts at the textile mill and the local diner, saving every penny to purchase this little slice of heaven on the Outer Banks of North Carolina back in 1985. Back then, this stretch of coastline was still affordable for working-class families like ours. The house was a modest two-bedroom cottage with weathered cedar shingles and a wraparound deck that needed constant repairs. But it sat on 3/4 of an acre of prime beachfront property, and from the moment we walked through that front door, George and I knew we were home. Those early years in this beach house were magical in ways I struggle to put into words. George would wake up before dawn every Saturday to cast his lines from our private stretch of shore, bringing home coolers full of red drum and flounder that we would clean together on the back deck. I would spend my afternoons planting beach grass and sea oats to protect our dunes from erosion, creating the lush landscape that surrounds the house today. Every Saturday evening became a tradition. We hosted elaborate barbecue parties for our neighbors, setting up long tables on the sand where everyone would gather to share fresh seafood corn on the cob and my famous 3-bean salad. George would play his guitar while the children built sandcastles and the adults told stories late into the night. Those gatherings created friendships that lasted decades and filled our home with laughter that seemed to seep into the very walls. When our son David was born, this house became even more precious to us. We taught him to swim in the gentle waves right outside our door, showed him how to identify different seashells along the tide line, and watched him build elaborate sand fortresses that would disappear with each high tide. Some of my most treasured memories are of the three of us sitting on the deck at sunset, George strumming his guitar while David and I sang along to old folk songs. George passed away 4 years ago after a brave but brutal fight with pancreatic cancer. In those final months, he would sit in his favorite chair on the deck, wrapped in the quilt my mother had made for our wedding, watching the endless rhythm of the waves. He told me that the sound of the ocean was the most peaceful thing he could imagine, and he made me promise that I would stay in this house as long as I was able. After George died, this beach house became more than just a home to me. It became my sanctuary, my place of healing, where I could still feel his presence in every creaking floorboard and salt-stained window. I would wake up each morning and make coffee for 2 out of habit, then sit on the deck, talking to him as if he were still there beside me. The house held our entire life together, and leaving it would have felt like abandoning George all over again. Our son David is 38 now, a successful engineer who works for a construction company in Charlotte, about 3 hours inland from here. He has always been a good man with a kind heart, the type of person who stops to help strangers change flat tires and remembers his elderly neighbors' birthdays. 8 years ago, he married Stephanie, a 34-year-old woman who seemed perfect for him in every way that mattered. Stephanie worked as a marketing coordinator for a medical device company, and she impressed me immediately with her intelligence and ambition. She was articulate, well-dressed, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person, rather than just tolerating me as David's mother. She would call me twice a week just to chat, asking about my health, my garden, and whether I needed anything from town. During their engagement, Stephanie often mentioned how much she loved visiting the beach house and how peaceful she found the sound of the waves. She would help me prepare meals when they visited, and we would spend hours talking about everything from books to politics, while we worked side by side in the kitchen. I genuinely believed that I had gained not just a daughter-in-law, but a true friend. David and Stephanie have two beautiful children who light up my world. Emma is now 7 years old, a bright and curious little girl who loves collecting seashells and building sandcastles. Jake is 5, an energetic boy who follows his grandfather's footsteps by showing an early fascination with fishing. When they visit, the house fills with the kind of joyful chaos that George and I always dreamed of having with grandchildren. In those early years of their marriage, I felt incredibly blessed by how well Stephanie seemed to fit into our family. When David and Stephanie were looking to buy their first house in Charlotte, I was happy to provide the down payment of $40,000 from my savings. I wanted them to have the stability and security that George and I had worked so hard to achieve, and seeing them settled in a good neighborhood felt like the best possible use of the money George had left me. Stephanie seemed genuinely grateful for my help sending me photos of their new home and updates about their renovations. She invited me for every holiday, made sure the grandchildren called me regularly, and always remembered to send me Mother's Day cards with handwritten notes about how much she appreciated me being part of their family. But over the past 18 months, I had begun to notice subtle changes in Stephanie's behavior that left me feeling uneasy. She started making comments about my age that seemed unnecessary and pointed. During phone conversations, she would ask if I had been remembering to take my medications, whether I was having trouble with daily tasks, and if I ever felt confused or overwhelmed living alone. At first, I attributed these questions to natural concern for my well-being. After all, I was living by myself in a house that required constant maintenance, miles away from the nearest hospital or family member. But the questions became more frequent and more specific, focusing on things like whether I remembered to lock my doors at night if I'd gotten lost while driving, or if I had repeated the same story multiple times during our conversations. The truth was, I was managing my life perfectly well, and had been since George's death. Every morning, I woke up at 6:30 sharp and began my day with a yoga routine on the deck, stretching my muscles while watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. I maintained a small but productive garden of tomatoes, herbs, and beach peas that provided fresh ingredients for my meals. My afternoons were spent reading mystery novels, working crossword puzzles, or taking long walks along the beach to keep my mind and body active. I drove my 12-year-old Honda Civic to the grocery store twice a week, planned and prepared all my own meals, managed my own banking and bill paying, and kept up with all my medical appointments without any assistance. My doctor had pronounced me in excellent health for my age just 3 months earlier, noting that my blood pressure was normal, my cholesterol levels were good, and my cognitive function showed no signs of decline. Despite my obvious independence and capability, Stephanie's questions about my mental acuity continued to increase. She began suggesting that I might benefit from having someone check on me more regularly, perhaps a housekeeper or a home health aide who could help with daily tasks. When I politely declined these suggestions, explaining that I enjoyed my independence and was managing fine on my own, she would respond with comments about how hard it was for family members to recognize when they needed help. 3 weeks before the incident that would change everything, David and Stephanie came for one of their regular monthly weekend visits. I had spent Friday preparing for their arrival, cleaning the guest rooms thoroughly, stocking the refrigerator with their favorite foods, and planning special activities for the grandchildren. I was genuinely excited to see them and looking forward to a relaxing family weekend. Friday evening dinner was a feast that took me most of the day to prepare. I had driven to the fish market that morning to buy fresh blue crab, which I steamed with Old Bay seasoning and served with melted butter. Alongside the crab, I prepared corn on the cob, my famous coleslaw recipe that used a vinegar-based dressing and homemade cornbread that was still warm from the oven. We ate on the deck as the sun began to set, creating the perfect ambience for family conversation. The children chattered excitedly about school and their friends, while David told us about his latest construction projects. The atmosphere felt warm and loving, exactly the kind of family gathering that George and I had always cherished. However, throughout the evening, I noticed that Stephanie seemed more interested in asking questions about my finances than engaging in casual conversation. She inquired about my insurance policies, wondering if I had adequate coverage for both healthcare and property damage. She asked detailed questions about my will, wanting to know if it was up to date, and whether I had made any recent changes to it. Most unusually, she brought up the topic of power of attorney, asking if I had designated anyone to make financial or medical decisions on my behalf if I ever became unable to do so myself. When I explained that I had updated my will the previous year, but had not felt the need to grant power of attorney to anyone, since I was in good health and mentally sharp, she seemed surprised and slightly concerned. I answered all her questions openly and honestly, trusting that her interest came from a place of genuine love and concern for my well-being. I told her about my life insurance policy worth $200,000, my savings account, that contained the remainder of George's life insurance payout, and mentioned that I had indeed updated my will to ensure that David would inherit everything, including the beach house that had become so much more valuable over the years. Looking back now, I realize that I was essentially providing Stephanie with a complete inventory of my assets and a detailed understanding of my legal arrangements. At the time, I felt grateful to have family members who cared enough about me to ensure that my affairs were in order and that I would be taken care of if anything happened to me. That evening concluded with warm hugs and promises to visit again soon. As I watched their car disappear down the coastal highway, with the children waving from the back windows, I felt a deep sense of contentment and gratitude. Despite the tremendous loss of George, I believed that I was blessed to have such a loving son and daughter-in-law who wanted to ensure my continued happiness and security. I went to bed that night feeling fortunate and loved, completely unaware that I had just provided Stephanie with all the information she would need to formulate a plan that would threaten everything I held dear. The trust and openness I had shown during our conversation about my finances would soon be used against me in ways I never could have imagined. The night that changed everything forever started exactly 3 weeks later, when David and Stephanie arrived for what I thought would be another pleasant family weekend. From the moment they walked through the front door on Friday evening, something felt different about the atmosphere, though I could not quite put my finger on what had changed. Stephanie seemed more restless than usual, moving around the house with a kind of nervous energy that I had never seen before. While I was giving Emma and Jake their usual tour of the seashell collection, I kept on the mantelpiece. I noticed Stephanie walking through the living room with her phone out, apparently taking photos of various corners of the room. When I asked if she was capturing memories of the family visit, she quickly put her phone away and said she was just checking messages. During dinner on Friday night, Stephanie's behavior became even more unusual. She made several comments about how valuable beachfront property had become in recent years, mentioning specific sales figures for houses in our area that seemed remarkably well researched for someone who did not work in real estate. She wondered aloud how much my homeowner's insurance coverage was worth, asking if I had increased it recently to account for rising property values. When I mentioned that I had indeed increased my coverage to $2 million the previous year, on my insurance agent's recommendation, I noticed Stephanie's eyes light up with an intensity that made me feel uncomfortable. She followed up immediately by asking about flood insurance fire coverage, and whether I had considered the replacement cost of the furnishings and personal belongings in the house. Her questions felt different from the casual inquiries she had made during previous visits. These were detailed, specific, and delivered with the kind of focus that suggested she had prepared them in advance. I found myself wondering why she needed to know so much about my insurance arrangements, but I answered her questions truthfully because I had no reason to suspect any ulterior motive. After we finished eating and cleaning up the kitchen together, I excused myself to go to bed around 10 o'clock, feeling unusually drained from what should have been a relaxing evening with family. But sleep completely eluded me that night. I lay in bed replaying the conversations from dinner, unable to shake the feeling that something significant was happening that I did not understand. Stephanie's intensity when discussing my insurance coverage kept bothering me. Her questions had felt less like family concern and more like a business evaluation. Combined with her secretive phone photography earlier in the evening, I began to suspect that this weekend visit had a purpose beyond spending quality time with family. By midnight, I had given up any hope of falling asleep. My mind was racing with questions and concerns that I could not organize into anything coherent. I decided to go downstairs to make myself a cup of chamomile tea, hoping that the warm drink and some quiet time in the kitchen would help me relax enough to get some rest. As I descended the stairs as quietly as possible, being careful not to wake anyone else in the house, I heard voices coming from outside. Through the kitchen window, I could see David and Stephanie sitting on the deck furniture engaged in what appeared to be a serious and intense conversation. The tone of their voices, even though I could not yet make out the words, told me immediately that this was not a casual late-night chat between spouses. Something about their body language and the way they were leaning toward each other suggested that they were discussing something important and private. My curiosity got the better of my usual respect for other people's privacy, and I crept closer to the sliding glass door that led to the deck, staying in the shadows where they would not be able to see me. What I heard in the next few minutes turned my blood cold and changed my understanding of my relationship with my family forever. "Your mother is becoming a liability," Stephanie was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the night air, despite her attempt to keep the conversation quiet. "She is sitting on a gold mine and does not even realize it." David's response surprised me and gave me a small glimmer of hope. "She seems fine to me. She is managing well on her own." But Stephanie was not deterred by his defense of me. "Fine." Her voice took on a sharp, almost angry edge. "She forgot to lock the door twice this week. And did you see how confused she was about the insurance questions tonight? She could barely keep track of what policies she has." My heart started pounding as I realized that Stephanie was completely fabricating these claims. I had not forgotten to lock any doors, and I had answered every one of her insurance questions clearly and accurately. She was creating false evidence of cognitive decline that simply did not exist. "I have been researching this extensively," Stephanie continued, and I could hear paper rustling as if she was consulting notes. "Sunset Manor has excellent reviews and a wonderful memory care program. She would be much safer there with professional staff, watching her 24 hours a day." The words hit me like a physical blow. Memory care. They were discussing placing me in a nursing home for people with dementia, despite the fact that my mind was as sharp as it had ever been. "I do not know," David said slowly, and I could hear the reluctance in his voice. "She really loves this place. It would break her heart to leave." "David, you need to listen to me." Stephanie's voice became more urgent and persuasive. "This beach house is worth at least $2 million in today's market. Maybe more with all the development that has been happening along this stretch of coast. We could sell it and use the money for her care, plus have enough left over for the kids' college funds and that boat you have been wanting for years." I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, feeling dizzy as the full scope of their discussion became clear. They were not just planning to put me in a nursing home. They were planning to sell my house, the home where George and I had built our life together, where his memory lived in every room where I felt most connected to the man I had loved for nearly 4 decades. But Stephanie was just getting started with her persuasion campaign. "I have already spoken to an attorney about the legal aspects of this situation," she said, and I could hear the confidence in her voice. "Once we establish that she is mentally incompetent, we can obtain guardianship and power of attorney. The process is actually quite straightforward, and it is really for her own good." Mentally incompetent. David sounded uncertain and uncomfortable. "Mum seems sharp to me." "Trust me, I know what to look for," Stephanie replied with the kind of authority that made my skin crawl. "I have been documenting incidents for months now. The door lock's confusion about dates repeating stories during our conversations. It will be easy to demonstrate to a judge that she needs supervised care." The full horror of what she was saying hit me like a tsunami. Stephanie had been deliberately creating situations designed to make me appear confused and forgetful, then documenting my normal human moments of distraction as evidence of cognitive decline. She had been building a case against my mental competency for months, all while pretending to be a caring and concerned daughter-in-law. I realized that every phone call, every visit, every seemingly innocent question about my daily routine had been part of a calculated campaign to gather evidence that could be used to have me declared legally incompetent. The woman I had trusted. The woman I had helped financially. The woman I had welcomed into my family with open arms had been systematically planning to steal my independence, my home, and my dignity. What I discovered next would shake the very foundation of everything I thought I understood about my family, and leave me questioning whether anyone in my life could be trusted. After listening to Stephanie outline her plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and sell my house, I remained frozen behind the kitchen door, barely able to breathe as the conversation continued on the deck outside. David's voice carried a note of deep reluctance as he responded to his wife's proposal. "I just do not feel right about this, Stephanie. Mum built her whole life in this house. Taking it away from her feels wrong." "Wrong." Stephanie's voice rose slightly before she caught herself and lowered it again. "What is wrong is letting an elderly woman live alone in a house worth millions of dollars when she clearly cannot take care of herself properly. What happens when she falls down those stairs? What happens when she forgets to turn off the stove and burns the place down?" I wanted to shout through the glass door that I had never fallen down any stairs and had never forgotten to turn off any appliances, but I forced myself to remain silent and continue listening. I needed to understand the full scope of what they were planning before I decided how to respond. "The nursing home I researched has a wonderful program," Stephanie continued. "She would have her own room 3 meals a day, prepared for her activities to keep her mind active, and medical staff available around the clock. She would actually be much happier there than she is here worrying about maintaining this big house all by herself." "But she does not seem worried about maintaining the house," David pointed out. "Every time we visit, everything looks perfect. The garden is beautiful, the house is clean, she seems to be managing fine." "That is exactly what I mean," Stephanie said, and I could hear the manipulation in her tone. "She is exhausting herself trying to keep up appearances. She is probably struggling more than she wants to admit, and she is too proud to ask for help. We would be doing her a favor by taking this burden off her shoulders." The way she twisted my independence and capability into evidence of struggle and denial made me understand how skilled she was at psychological manipulation. She could take any fact about my life and reframe it to support her narrative that I needed to be institutionalized. After David and Stephanie finally went to bed around 1 in the morning, I remained in the kitchen, my mind reeling from everything I had overheard. I spent the rest of the night sitting at the kitchen table, trying to process the betrayal and figure out what I could do to protect myself from their scheme. When morning came, I forced myself to act completely normal, preparing their favorite breakfast of blueberry pancakes, crispy bacon, and fresh coffee as if nothing had happened. I needed time to think through my options, and I could not let them suspect that I knew about their plan. David and Stephanie came downstairs around 8:30, both acting casual and affectionate. David kissed my cheek and complimented the pancakes, telling me how much he had missed my cooking. Stephanie chatted cheerfully about taking the children to build sandcastles later that morning, acting every inch the loving daughter-in-law. But I found myself studying her with new eyes, noticing things that I had missed before. The way her gaze swept around the room as if she were mentally cataloguing my possessions and calculating their value. The way she asked seemingly innocent questions about my daily routine that were actually gathering intelligence about my habits and vulnerabilities. "You know Ruth," Stephanie said as she buttered her pancake with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "I was thinking it might be fun to visit some of those lovely senior living communities in the area this afternoon, just to see what they offer. Some of them have incredible amenities, like swimming pools, libraries, and organized social activities." I smiled sweetly and told her that sounded interesting, all while my stomach churned with anger and disbelief. She was actually suggesting that we tour nursing homes together, probably planning to use my reactions as further evidence of my supposed cognitive decline. Around 10 o'clock, David announced that he wanted to take the children for a long walk on the beach to look for interesting shells and maybe try their hand at surf fishing. Stephanie said she preferred to stay behind and help me with some household chores, which immediately raised my suspicions about her true motives. After David and the children left, chattering excitedly about their beach adventure, I noticed that Stephanie had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to change clothes. Normally, I would never violate someone's privacy by looking at their personal computer. But the conversation I had overheard the night before had changed the rules of engagement entirely. I felt completely justified in protecting myself by any means necessary, including investigating the extent of Stephanie's planning. What I found on her laptop was far more disturbing and comprehensive than anything I could have imagined. Her email inbox contained multiple message threads with 3 different nursing homes in the area, including detailed price comparisons, availability information, and specific questions about their memory care programs. She had been corresponding with these facilities for at least 2 months, presenting herself as a concerned family member seeking care for an elderly relative with early-stage cognitive decline. Even more shocking, she had been researching the legal requirements for obtaining guardianship of an elderly person in North Carolina. Her browser history showed dozens of searches for terms like proving mental incompetence in elderly, legal guardianship procedures, and how to override elderly parents' wishes. The most damning evidence was a detailed spreadsheet that listed all of my assets along with estimated current values. The beach house was listed at $2.2 million. My savings account's investment portfolio, life insurance policy, and even my jewelry were all catalogued with remarkable precision. At the bottom of the spreadsheet was a timeline showing when each asset could be liquidated after obtaining legal guardianship. In her email draft folder, I found a message to a real estate agent that made my hands shake with rage. The message described my beach house in detail and requested a professional market analysis for what she called a quick sale situation. The email indicated that she expected to have the property available for sale within 6 months and was looking for an agent who could handle a fast transaction. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was a document titled Documentation Log that contained detailed notes about my supposed cognitive failures. She had been recording incidents going back 8 months, describing things like forgot to lock front door on March 15th. Repeated same story about neighbor's cat twice during single conversation, and seemed confused about current date when asked directly. Reading through these fabricated entries, I realized that Stephanie had been creating false evidence of dementia symptoms that I had never actually exhibited. She was building a comprehensive case file that could be presented to a court as proof of my mental incompetence, all while maintaining the facade of a caring daughter-in-law who was simply concerned about my well-being. As I was quickly closing the laptop and returning it to its original position, I heard Stephanie's voice outside the kitchen window. She was on her cell phone, speaking to someone in a tone that was completely different yet from the sweet, caring voice she used with me and David. "Trust me, Alice," she was saying as she paced back and forth on the deck. "Once we get her situated in the memory care facility, we can finally move forward with both properties. David still has no idea about the real ownership situation with your house." Alice. I knew that name immediately. Alice was George's sister-in-law, the widow of George's older brother Thomas. She lived in a beautiful colonial-style house about 20 minutes inland that David had always assumed he would inherit someday when Alice passed away. I pressed myself against the kitchen window, straining to hear more of this conversation that seemed to involve yet another property and another family member. David still thinks his father inherited the house when Thomas died 10 years ago. Stephanie continued, her voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "He has no idea that you retained full ownership and just let them think it belonged to George's family line. Once Ruth is out of the picture and we have control of her assets, I can convince you to sell to us at below market value, and David will never know the difference." My hands began shaking as I realized that George had been mistaken about inheriting his brother's house, and David had grown up believing he would someday own property that actually belonged to Alice. Stephanie was planning to manipulate this misunderstanding to acquire a second valuable property through deception. "The real estate agent I've been working with thinks we can get at least $1.8 million for your place," Stephanie was saying. "Combined with Ruth's beach house, we are looking at almost $4 million total, more than enough to pay for her nursing home care and set our family up financially for life." I sank into a kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the scope and complexity of Stephanie's scheme. She was not just planning to steal my house and have me institutionalized. She was orchestrating a multi-property fraud that involved manipulating David's misconceptions about his inheritance while simultaneously destroying my independence and stealing my life's work. The woman I had trusted, helped financially, and welcomed into my family had been planning the most comprehensive betrayal I could imagine, and she had been doing it all while pretending to love and care for me, calling me twice a week to ask about my health, helping me with household chores during visits, and positioning herself as the perfect daughter-in-law. The next 24 hours tested every ounce of strength, intelligence, and determination I had accumulated over 66 years of life. As I sat in my kitchen processing the full scope of Stephanie's betrayal, I realized that I was facing the most critical decision of my entire life. I could either allow myself to become a victim of her elaborate scheme, or I could fight back with everything I had. The first thing I understood was that time was not on my side. Stephanie had been planning this for months, building her case systematically and professionally. She had legal research, documented evidence, fabricated though it was, and established relationships with nursing homes and real estate professionals. If I was going to protect myself, I needed to act quickly and decisively. I also realized that I could not count on David to protect me, not because he did not love me, but because he was being manipulated just as expertly as I had been. Stephanie had convinced him that her questions about my mental state came from genuine concern, and she would likely be able to convince him that any resistance I offered was itself evidence of cognitive decline. Most importantly, I understood that I had one crucial advantage that Stephanie did not know about. I was fully aware of her plan, while she believed I was completely oblivious. This element of surprise would be my most powerful weapon if I used it correctly. That afternoon, while David and the children were still exploring the beach, and Stephanie was taking what she called a well-deserved nap, I made the phone call that would change everything. I contacted my longtime attorney, Margaret Patterson, who had handled George's estate after his death and had been our family lawyer for over 15 years. "Margaret," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to see you immediately about a very serious legal matter. Can you meet me this evening after my family leaves for Charlotte?" Margaret could hear the urgency in my voice and agreed to meet me at her office at 7 o'clock that evening. I spent the rest of the afternoon acting completely normal, helping David identify different types of shells, with the children preparing a lovely seafood dinner and engaging in pleasant conversation as if nothing had changed. But internally, I was planning the most important strategy session of my life. When I met Margaret that evening and explained everything I had discovered, she was both shocked and immediately ready to help. "Ruth, what Stephanie is planning constitutes elder abuse and fraud," she told me firmly. "This is not just morally wrong, it is illegal, and we need to move quickly to protect your assets and your independence." Margaret's first recommendation was that we needed to document everything I had learned and create a legal paper trail that would demonstrate my mental competency beyond any doubt. She scheduled me for an immediate cognitive assessment with a geriatric psychiatrist who could provide professional documentation of my mental sharpness. But more urgently, she suggested that we needed to remove the primary motivation for Stephanie's scheme by making it impossible for her to profit from my institutionalization. "If she cannot access your house and your money," Margaret explained, "she has no reason to pursue this plan." We worked together until nearly midnight, developing a comprehensive legal strategy that would protect my assets while exposing Stephanie's fraud. The plan was complex but achievable, and it would require perfect timing and absolute secrecy to succeed. The next morning, I called Alice to confirm what I had overheard about the ownership of her house. Alice was surprised to hear from me, but immediately honest about the situation. "Ruth, I have been struggling with how to handle this for years," she admitted. "When Thomas died, he left the house to me, not to George. But George was so sure that he had inherited it, and I did not want to hurt his feelings by correcting him. After George passed away, I let David continue believing what his father had believed. But I have been feeling guilty about the deception." "Alice," I told her, "I think it is time we cleared up this misunderstanding, especially since someone is trying to take advantage of it." I explained what I had discovered about Stephanie's plan, and Alice was horrified. "I had no idea she was planning something like this," she said. "I thought her questions about selling the house were just casual conversation." Alice and I agreed to work together to prevent Stephanie from manipulating both of our situations. Alice needed to sell her house for legitimate financial reasons related to her retirement, but she wanted the transaction to be honest and fair rather than part of a fraudulent scheme. Margaret arranged for Alice to meet with us the following day to coordinate our legal response. By Tuesday evening, we had developed a plan that would not only protect my assets, but would also ensure that David received fair treatment regarding Alice's property. The key to our strategy was speed and surprise. We needed to complete all of our legal transactions before Stephanie could move forward with her plan to have me declared incompetent. Margaret had researched the guardianship process and determined that Stephanie would need several weeks to file the necessary paperwork and schedule court hearings. We had a narrow window of opportunity, and everything depended on executing our plan flawlessly before Stephanie realized what was happening. Margaret contacted a private buyer who had been interested in beachfront property in our area for months. This buyer was willing to pay cash for a quick closing, which meant we could complete the sale of my house within days rather than weeks or months. Similarly, Alice was ready to sell her house immediately, but instead of allowing Stephanie to manipulate the transaction, we arranged for me to purchase it at fair market value and then transfer ownership to David as a gift. This would ensure that David received the property he had always expected to inherit, while preventing Stephanie from profiting from the deception. By Thursday morning, just 5 days after I had discovered Stephanie's plan, we were ready to execute our counterattack. Margaret had prepared all the necessary legal documents, the buyers were ready to transfer funds, and Alice and I were prepared to sign everything needed to complete both transactions. The beauty of our plan was that it was completely legal, ethically sound, and would accomplish exactly what Stephanie claimed to want, ensuring that my assets were managed responsibly and that David received his rightful inheritance. The only difference was that Stephanie would not profit from the process, and I would maintain my independence and dignity. As I prepared for the most important day of my life, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination that surprised me with its intensity. I was sad that my family had been torn apart by greed and manipulation, but I was determined to prove that wisdom and experience could triumph over deception and betrayal. I was about to show Stephanie and anyone else who might underestimate elderly people that we are not easy targets, and that sometimes the best defense is a carefully planned and perfectly executed offense. Friday morning, November 15th, became the day that would define the rest of my life and expose the true character of everyone in my family. I woke up at 5:30, 2 hours earlier than usual, with a sense of purpose and clarity that I had not felt since George's death. Today was the day I would take control of my own destiny and fight back against the people who thought they could steal my independence and dignity. By 6 o'clock, I was sitting in Margaret Patterson's office, signing the final documents to sell my beach house for $2.3 million, nearly 100,000 more than even Stephanie's optimistic estimates. The buyer, a developer who had been watching the property for months, was delighted to finally have the opportunity to purchase it and had arranged for immediate electronic transfer of funds. At 7:30, Alice arrived to complete the sale of her house to me for $1.9 million, its full fair market value. The transaction was structured so that ownership would transfer immediately to David as a gift, ensuring that he would receive the property he had always expected to inherit, while preventing any possibility of Stephanie manipulating the situation. By 8:45, both transactions were legally complete. Electronic funds had been transferred, titles had been recorded with the county, and all paperwork had been filed with the appropriate authorities. In less than 3 hours, I had successfully sold my house and purchased another one, restructuring my entire financial situation in a way that would make it impossible for Stephanie to profit from her scheme. The timing was crucial, because David and Stephanie were driving down from Charlotte that morning for what they thought would be a normal weekend visit. They had no idea that the house they were coming to stay in no longer belonged to me, or that the property David thought he might inherit someday was now officially his. Margaret had arranged for professional movers to pack my personal belongings the previous evening, so everything I wanted to keep was already loaded in a truck and ready to be transported to my new temporary housing. I had rented a furnished condominium in a retirement community 30 minutes away, where I could live comfortably while deciding on my permanent living arrangements. I returned to the beach house at 9:30, just as David and Stephanie were arriving with the children. They pulled into the driveway of what was now someone else's property, completely unaware that their carefully planned scheme had been systematically dismantled in the space of a single morning. "Good morning," I called out cheerfully, walking over to help them unload their luggage as if nothing had changed. David hugged me warmly and commented on how relaxed and happy I looked. Stephanie kissed my cheek and said something about looking forward to a peaceful weekend by the ocean. Both of them were acting completely normal, maintaining their facades, while internally preparing to begin the process of having me declared mentally incompetent. I prepared their usual breakfast of scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and fresh orange juice, setting the table on the deck so we could enjoy the ocean view one last time together. The children ran around the yard, excited to be back at their grandmother's house, completely innocent of the adult drama that was about to unfold. As we sat around the breakfast table making small talk about the children's school activities and David's latest work projects, I felt an almost surreal sense of calm. I knew that in the next few minutes I would deliver news that would change our family forever. But I also knew that I was doing the right thing to protect myself and preserve the truth. "I have some news to share with you both," I announced as we finished eating, reaching for the manila folder I had placed beside my chair. David smiled at me expectantly. "What kind of news, Mum?" I opened the folder and spread the legal documents across the table between them, watching their faces carefully as they tried to understand what they were seeing. "I sold the house," I said simply. "Both houses, actually." The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was the kind of complete, stunned quiet that follows a lightning strike when the thunder has not yet arrived. But everyone knows that something momentous has just happened. David picked up the first document, staring at it with growing confusion. "Mum, what do you mean you sold the house? This house?" "I sold this beach house this morning for $2.3 million, I explained calmly. "And I purchased the house that you thought belonged to your father, then immediately transferred ownership to you as a gift. It turns out that Alice has been the legal owner all these years, not our family." Stephanie had gone completely white, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips as she processed what she was hearing. "I do not understand," David said slowly. "Why did you sell the house? And what do you mean about Alice's house?" Before I could answer, I pulled out my cell phone and played the recording I had made of their conversation on the deck earlier that week. In the morning, quiet with only the sound of waves in the background, Stephanie's voice came through with perfect clarity. "Your mother is becoming a liability. She is sitting on a gold mine and does not even realize it." David's face went through a series of expressions as he listened to the recording, confusion, giving way to disbelief, and then to growing horror as he realized what he was hearing. What happened next was unlike anything I had ever witnessed in my 66 years of life, and I pray I never see anything like it again. The explosion of emotion that erupted from Stephanie when she realized that her carefully constructed plan had been completely destroyed was so violent and intense that I actually feared for my physical safety. As the recording continued to play, revealing the full scope of Stephanie's plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and sell my property, David's face transformed from confusion to shock to outright horror. When he heard his wife discussing nursing homes and legal guardianship, he looked at her as if he was seeing a complete stranger. "What is this?" he asked Stephanie, his voice rising with disbelief. "What are you talking about on this recording?" Stephanie tried to maintain her composure, but I could see panic beginning to set in as she realized how much I had discovered about her scheme. "David, you have to understand, your mother recorded a private conversation without permission. She violated our privacy." "You were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent?" David demanded, ignoring her deflection. "You were researching nursing homes without even talking to me about it." "It was for her own good." Stephanie's voice was becoming shrill as her careful facade began to crumble. "She cannot live alone safely anymore, and this house is too much for her to handle." "I have never been confused about anything," I said firmly, pulling out more documents from my folder. "But you seem to be confused about what family loyalty means." I then showed David the emails I had found on Stephanie's laptop, the correspondence with nursing homes, the legal research about guardianship, and the spreadsheet detailing my assets with timelines for liquidating them. With each piece of evidence I presented, David's expression grew darker and more horrified. "You were planning to have my mother put in a nursing home so you could sell her house." David's voice was now loud enough that the children stopped playing in the yard and looked toward the deck with concern. It was for our family's future, Stephanie screamed, abandoning any pretense of calm. Do you have any idea how much money we are talking about? Do you have any idea what we could have done with $4 million? 4 million. David stood up from the table so abruptly that he knocked over his coffee cup. What 4 million? That was when I played the recording of Stephanie's phone conversation with Alice, revealing her plan to manipulate the sale of the second house by taking advantage of David's mistaken belief about his inheritance. As David listened to his wife discussing how to deceive him about the ownership of Alice's house, something fundamental broke in his expression. The man who had always been gentle and trusting was forced to confront the fact that his wife had been systematically lying to him while planning to victimize his own mother. "You knew?" he asked Stephanie, his voice barely controlled. "You knew I did not really own Uncle Thomas's house, and you were planning to manipulate that situation too." Stephanie's response was to completely lose control. She began screaming at both of us, her voice becoming so loud and harsh that it hurt to listen to. "Everyone manipulates everything. That is how the world works. Your mother manipulated you your whole life. Alice manipulated your entire family about the house, and I was just trying to secure our future." She started pacing frantically around the deck, gesturing wildly as she shouted, "You could have had everything. We could have been set for life. But you are too weak to do what needs to be done." The screaming escalated to a level that was truly frightening. Stephanie's voice cracked and became almost inhuman as she realized that months of planning had been destroyed in a single morning. $4 million, she kept repeating. $4 million, and you are going to let it slip away because you are too sentimental to do what is best for your family. David tried to calm her down, but she turned her fury on him as well. "You are pathetic," she screamed. "You could have been rich, but instead you are going to stay poor because you cannot stand up to an old woman." The sound of her screaming was so loud that it echoed off the house and probably carried halfway down the beach. I had never heard anything like it. The sound of someone's carefully constructed lies and manipulations collapsing around them in real time. When David asked about the children, worried that they were hearing this terrifying display, Stephanie screamed that they would understand when they were older, that their father had thrown away their financial future out of misplaced loyalty to his mother. She grabbed the legal documents from the table and began tearing them up as if destroying the papers could somehow undo the sales that had already been completed. "These do not mean anything," she screamed. "We can fight this in court. We can prove she is incompetent." "Actually," I said, pulling out another folder from beside my chair, "you can." I showed them the professional cognitive assessment I had undergone the previous day with a geriatric psychiatrist, documenting my mental sharpness in detail. I also revealed the other recordings I had made, including additional conversations about her fraudulent planning and her attempts to create false evidence of my cognitive decline. Stephanie's screaming reached a crescendo that was genuinely terrifying as she realized that every aspect of her scheme had been anticipated and countered. The sound filled the air like the cry of a wounded animal, raw and desperate and utterly defeated. As the immediate crisis subsided and Stephanie finally exhausted herself with screaming, the real work of rebuilding our family began. The aftermath of that morning was painful, but necessary, like surgery to remove a cancer that had been growing undetected for months. Stephanie packed her belongings that same day, still raging about lawyers and court battles that we all knew she would never pursue. Her final words to David before driving away were threats about custody and predictions that he would regret choosing me over her. But David had not chosen me over her. He had chosen honesty over deception, integrity over greed, and family loyalty over personal profit. After Stephanie left, David and I spent the rest of that weekend having the most honest conversations we had shared since he was a teenager. He apologized repeatedly for not recognizing what Stephanie was doing, and I assured him that he had been as much a victim of her manipulation as I had been. "I feel like such a fool," he said, as we sat on the deck that evening, watching the sunset over what was now someone else's ocean view. "How did I not see who she really was? Because you loved her." I told him, taking his hand. "And when you love someone, you want to believe the best about them, even when they are showing you their worst." David made the difficult decision to file for divorce within 2 weeks. The evidence I had gathered of Stephanie's planning made it impossible for her to claim any rights to properties she had intended to steal. More importantly, her behavior during the confrontation witnessed by the children made David's case for primary custody much stronger than it might have been otherwise. The divorce proceedings revealed even more about Stephanie's character. She had been hiding credit card debt, had taken out a loan against David's retirement account without his knowledge, and had been planning to leave him once she had gained access to what she thought would be our family's wealth. In the months that followed, I used the money from selling the beach house to create a new life that was both more manageable and more fulfilling than what I had before. I purchased a beautiful condominium in a 55-plus community called Ocean Breeze, located 30 minutes from David's home in Charlotte. The community offered exactly what Stephanie had claimed to want for me: security, social activities, and assistance when needed, but with complete independence and dignity. My new home has a lovely view of a lake where I can watch ducks and herons while drinking my morning coffee. The community has a beautiful garden area where I grow tomatoes and herbs, and a clubhouse where I have made new friends who share my interests in reading art and travel. For the first time in years, I felt truly free to pursue my own interests and dreams. I enrolled in watercolor painting classes at the community center and discovered a talent I never knew I had. I joined a book club that meets every Tuesday evening, where we discuss everything from mystery novels to historical biographies. Most importantly, I began traveling again, visiting old friends in different states, and taking the trips that George and I had always planned to take together. 6 months after our family crisis, David met Jennifer, a second-grade teacher at Emma and Jake's school. The difference between Jennifer's genuine kindness and Stephanie's manipulative concern was immediately obvious to everyone who met her. Jennifer treats the children with authentic love, never asks about my finances, and has never once suggested that I need assistance with daily living beyond what any caring family member might offer. David and I now have a relationship built on complete honesty rather than polite assumptions. We talk openly about finances, family decisions, and future planning, ensuring that neither of us will ever again be vulnerable to the kind of deception that Stephanie practiced. Our weekly visits have become the highlight of both our lives, filled with genuine connection rather than hidden agendas. The children adjusted to the divorce remarkably well, especially once they were no longer exposed to Stephanie's increasingly erratic behavior. Emma and Jake love visiting my condominium, where they can swim in the community pool, feed ducks at the lake, and help me tend my garden. They have no memory of their mother's financial scheming, only the peace that came when the adult conflict finally ended. As for the house that David now owns, Alice's former home, he and Jennifer are slowly renovating it as a weekend retreat, where our extended family can gather for holidays and special occasions. Alice visits regularly and loves seeing the house filled with children's laughter and family gatherings again, just as it was when her late husband Thomas was alive. Looking back on this experience now, almost a year later, I realize that it taught me several crucial lessons about life, family, and the importance of standing up for yourself, regardless of your age or circumstances. Most importantly, I learned that growing older does not mean growing helpless, naive, or vulnerable to manipulation. Sometimes it means growing wiser, braver, and more willing to fight for what is right. I learned that protecting yourself is not selfish or unkind. It is necessary, and sometimes the best way to protect your family is to protect yourself first. I also discovered that trust, once broken, fundamentally changes the nature of every relationship it touches. David and I now have a stronger, more honest relationship than we ever had before, built on mutual respect rather than unexamined assumptions. We both understand that family loyalty is something that must be earned and maintained through consistent actions, not just assumed based on blood relationships or legal bonds. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that justice does not always come from courts, lawyers, or external authorities. Sometimes, justice comes from having the courage and wisdom to stand up for yourself when you are being victimized, and from being smart enough to turn the tables on people who underestimate your intelligence, determination, and resourcefulness. If you are watching this video, and you have ever felt taken advantage of by people who are supposed to care about you, I want you to know that you have more power than you realize. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you cannot immediately identify what it is. Document suspicious behavior. Seek professional help when you need it, and never be afraid to take decisive action to protect your independence and dignity. Age is not a weakness, and experience is not a liability. The wisdom, patience, and strategic thinking that come with decades of living can be the most powerful weapons you possess against those who would exploit your kindness or underestimate your capabilities. What would you have done if you discovered your family plotting against you, the way Stephanie plotted against me? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for what was right? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because I believe we can all learn from each other's stories of overcoming betrayal and finding strength in difficult circumstances. If this story resonated with you or made you think about your own family relationships differently, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal empowerment, and finding the courage to fight for what matters most. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it is never too late to take control of your own life, regardless of what others might think or say about your decisions. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can share our experiences and support each other through life's most challenging moments. Remember that every day offers new opportunities to stand up for your values, protect your independence, and prove that wisdom and experience are forces to be respected, not exploited. May you always have the courage to fight for your dignity and the wisdom to know when that fight is necessary.